Hello and welcome to the third and the final part of how to create a RubyGems series, and in this video we are going to cover the following topics. We are going to see how to read and process zip archive using RubyZip module. We're going to see how to test this process. Then we are going to see how to upload and download files with the Lokalise API. Then we're going to see how to record HTTP interactions and replay them on subsequent test runs. This is going to be done with VCR solution. And finally, we're going to see how to publish your gem to RubyGems platform. So to get started, I would like to take care of the importer class, and specifically let's finalize the import method. This method should download translations from Lokalise and store them inside the Rails application. So this method is going to check whether the locales directory is empty or not. And if this directory is not empty, then we are going to ask the user whether she or he would like to proceed. And this is going to be done using the proceed when safe mode method. This check will not be performed, of course, if the safe mode option is disabled. And next we will open the URL pointing to the archive with all the translation files. And after extracting the files and placing them inside the locales folder, we are going to output task complete message and return true as a result. Now let's add the proceed when safe mode method. So it is going to check whether the save mode option is enabled and whether the locales directory is empty. So if yes, then we're going to ask the user whether he or she would like to proceed with the current operation. Great, now let's see how to open zip file containing our translations. And to do that, let's create a new method. This method is going to accept a path to the archive, and in theory this path may point to a local or a remote file. Then we're going to utilize RubyZip to open this archive, and then each entry is going to be processed one by one. Then let's create yet another method to read either local or a remote resource. So we're going to see if there is an HTTP part in this path, and if not, we're going to try and open it as a file. And you could, of course, utilize the open method provided by kernel, but this method is not considered to be safe, and therefore it is not recommended for production use. So yeah, the next stop is the fetch zip entries method. And this method is going to fetch all the files inside the archive one by one, and their extensions is going to be checked. So this, if the extension is valid, the file will be processed. Otherwise, we're going to skip it. In some cases, this archive may contain directories as well, and so the directories' names are going to be skipped as well. Also, we need the proper ext method, and this method will be used in multiple classes. Therefore, let's define it for the base class inside the base.rb file. So this method will convert the plain path to a special path name, and it is going to make sure that the extension actually matches the regular expression, and this regular expression is stored inside the file ext regexp option. Next, we need to process zip file entries. Therefore, create a new method called process inside the importer.rb file, and this method is going to do the following. So first of all, it reads the file contents fetched from the archive, then it gets the file name and its directory name inside the archive. So for example, there can be a YAML file stored inside the EN folder, and so this structure has to be preserved inside the Rails application as well. Therefore, we need both the file name and its directory. Then it creates the full path to the translation file, including the locales folder, the file directory, and its name, and then it creates the corresponding path. Next, it opens this newly created file and pastes translation data inside, and finally, if something goes wrong, then this method is going to output an error message. And so we need yet another method to fetch the file and directory name. This method will be placed inside the base.rb file, so here it is. This method will return a plain array with two items, directory and a file name. So we are done with processing this zip archive, and the last step is to actually download the requested translations from Lokalise, and to achieve that, let's create a new method called download files inside the importer.rb. So we are going to read the import options and then use Ruby Lokalise API client to perform the actual download. We will need the API client method, and it will be placed inside the base class. So here it is. Also, don't forget to require the API Ruby client. And the last step is to load all the necessary modules inside the importer.rb. And at this point, the import feature is done. So to make sure that everything is working fine, let's write a test for the import feature inside the import task spec.rb file, which should live inside spec lib tasks folder. Here we can remove the old test and add a new one. And in this new test, we are trying to download a sample archive and make sure that 4 translation files are being created. And however, we also need the before and after hooks, so let's create them now. And before running any tests, we have to make sure that the locales directory is actually created and that it is empty, to ensure tests isolation. And then after all the tests are executed, we are performing cleanup and remove all the translation files that were created during those tests. Now let's define some new helper methods inside the filemanager.rb support file. So those methods are going to check the file existence, return the path to locales directory, create this directory, then remove translation files, and count the number of translation files inside this directory. Now we may run rspec command and make sure that the tests are running properly. So that's nice, but the final thing that I would like to do is to test that the archive is being downloaded properly from Lokalise. And we are performing this operation via the API, and so theoretically we could perform the same operation inside our testing suite. But I would rather prefer not to send a real API request each time the test is executed, and instead it would be nice to record those interactions once, store the result in some file, and then replay this interaction on subsequent test runs. And to achieve that, we're going to use a solution called VCR. We have already added it to the gem spec in the previous video, but it requires some setup, so let's create a new VCR .rb file inside the support directory. So VCR is going to store all the interactions inside special YAML files. Those files are called cassettes. And well, yeah, if you are old enough, then you probably remember those VCR cassettes that we had with old films like Terminator or Conan the Barbarian and stuff like that. Certain data, however, like API token, should not be stored inside the cassettes, and therefore I am using the filter sensitive data to exclude the API token, because it should not be exposed. And now let's create a new file, importer spec.rb, inside lib localize rails task definitions folder. And here is the test. Here make sure to replace the project ID with some real ID. And in this test we're going to be using a cassette called download files, and if such cassette does not exist, then it will be created for us by sending a real API request, and on subsequent runs this cassette will be read to get the, well, fake response from the server. So here is this cassette. Great job. So now let's take care of the exporter class, specifically the export method, and it should upload all translation files that match the given criteria to Lokalise. So here are the main points to note. First of all, we are importing the base64 module, which is going to be used to properly encode translation data. Then we are taking each file inside the Lokalise directory. Then we are uploading translation file to Lokalise using the API, and the upload process is going to happen in the background on Lokalise. Therefore, the API is going to respond with a queued process data. And finally, we return the array with all the queued processes. Now let's also add a new method called each file, and this method is going to iterate over the files inside the Lokalise directory, and it is going to keep only the files that match the criteria. Then for each file we get its path relative to the Lokalise directory. So for example, if, well, there is a file with the following name, then the relative path is going to be just en nested en.yaml. And we will send this relative path to Lokalise, thus preserving the original file structure. And here is the method to check whether the file should be processed or not. And we have to make sure that the entry is actually a file, not a directory, that this entry has the proper extension, and also we make sure that the file is not blacklisted using the skip file export option, because this option accepts a lambda or a procedure, and it returns either true or false based on the file name. And to finalize this feature, let's create a method called opts, and it is going to return file uploading options. Here we are reading the file translation contents, then we determine the language ISO code, then we encode translations using base64 module, then provide the relative path to the translation file, then set the language ISO code, and finally add any additional export options that the user may have provided. Now let's test this functionality. First of all, here inside exporter spec file, I would like to add some let instructions and hooks. So let's add some helper methods as well. Specifically, we will need a new method to create sample translation files that are going to be uploaded to Lokalise like this. And now let's return to the spec file and add the following test. So, well, don't forget to replace the project ID again with a real one. And finally, you may run RSpec and observe the results. So a new cassette called upload files is going to be created for you, and here is its contents. So basically that's it. My congratulations, because our gem is now ready to be deployed to RubyGems. Well, before doing that, you may add some more tests to increase test coverage. You may find all the tests inside the Lokalise Rails repository at GitHub. Also, I would recommend pushing all the changes to GitHub and make sure that Travis CI tests are all green. And finally, you may run Rubocop to fix the found issues. And then you may navigate to rubygems.org, sign up, this is free. And then inside your command line interface, make sure that you have the most recent RubyGems software by running the following command, and also, well, install the bundler gem if for some reason you don't have it or maybe it's outdated. And then you can build your gem using the gem spec by running gem build. This command is going to create a new file with the gem extension. It is going to be named after your gem and its version. And then the final step is to actually publish your gem by running gem push. And yeah, make sure here to publish the gem file, not the gem spec. Then you will be asked to log in with RubyGems, and after a few seconds, your gem will be available to the world. That's basically it. Great job. Once again, don't forget that a textual version is available at Lokalise blog. So we have discussed how to create a RubyGem from scratch, how to add all the configuration, how to introduce a testing suite, and how to deploy this gem to RubyGems platform. So don't be shy, create your new gems, because, well, the open source is all about contributions from different developers. And even if your plugin will help only 10 people, that's still great, really. So, well, don't be afraid to contribute to open source. And that's it for today, folks. I thank you for staying with me and see you really soon.